Every great hurricane begins as a distant storm. Every generation believes it has learned the lessons of the past, yet history suggests that memory fades faster than risk. Tonight, we examine not only the science of hurricanes, but what these disasters reveal about human nature, responsibility, faith, and our relationship with the world we have inherited. Part 1. There is a profound, almost sacred quiet that falls over the coastal plains of the American Atlantic seaboard in the first days of June. A heavy, humid stillness in which the marsh grasses cease their rustling and the ocean seems to hold its collective breath beneath a canopy of stars. The official Atlantic hurricane season has formally begun, running its appointed course from the first day of June until the final twilight of November 30, 2026. Yet the waters remain unusually, deceptively calm. Meteorological institutions, including the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and Colorado State University, point to the developing rhythms of a nascent El Niño and the resulting atmospheric wind shear, forecasting a below-normal season with a 55% probability, predicting a mere 8 to 14 named storms to bear the alphabetical names beginning with Arthur. They offer these statistical projections as a comforting balm to coastal communities stretching from the barrier islands of Texas to the rocky shores of Maine, suggesting a year where the accumulated cyclone energy will remain subdued and the trade winds will maintain a stable, unyielding grip on the tropical Atlantic. But there is a deeper, more ancient silence that seasoned residents recognize in this early summer quiet, a stillness that precedes not merely a pause in the weather, but a profound and inevitable reckoning with the natural world. When we look out at that calm, moonlit horizon, listening to the rhythmic, indifferent crashing of the waves against the seawall, we must ask ourselves if we are merely witnessing a temporary meteorological reprieve, or if we are standing on the precipice of a deeper truth about our place in the cosmos. Many who study the long, sorrowful arc of environmental history and human hubris do not see these escalating cycles of destruction as mere anomalies of a chaotic universe. Rather, they see a profound, inescapable reality that these disasters are, in the most literal sense, God's punishment. They are a divine recalibration of human arrogance, a forceful and watery reminder that we are not the undisputed masters of this earth, but merely its temporary and often deeply reckless inhabitants. As the barometric pressure remains steady and the tropical outlooks issue their reassuring, data-driven predictions, we are left to confront a haunting, inescapable question that echoes in the humid night air. What happens next? Are the warning signs appearing again, cleverly disguised by the comforting, seductive language of probability and below-average forecasts? To truly understand the gravity of our present moment, we must first look backward, tracing the long, cyclical, and often tragic arc of American coastal history. A history defined by a dangerous and persistent illusion of the seasonal average. Forecasters assure us with 70% confidence that the ranges of 3 to 6 hurricanes and 1 to 3 major hurricanes will keep us safe, that the atmospheric stability will hold, and that the developing El Niño will act as a shield against the worst of the tropical cyclones. Yet, the historical record is littered with the shattered remnants of communities that place their absolute faith in these statistical averages, only to be swallowed by the sea when the models failed to capture the singular, catastrophic reality of a landfalling storm. Consider the Great Galveston Hurricane of 1900, a cataclysm that arrived without the benefit of modern satellite monitoring and claimed upwards of 8,000 lives, teaching a brutal lesson about the limits of human foresight. In the aftermath of that unimaginable tragedy, the survivors did not retreat from the water's edge. Instead, driven by a fierce, almost defiant pride, they raised the grade of the entire island and built a massive seawall, convincing themselves that human engineering could forever negotiate with the tides. It was a monument to human resilience, certainly, but it was equally a monument to human arrogance, a physical manifestation of our belief that we could outsmart the natural order. Over a century later, we find ourselves building glass towers, sprawling subdivisions, and fragile infrastructure on the very same vulnerable barrier islands, forgetting the blood, salt, and water that once saturated those sands. Are we repeating history? The evidence strongly suggests that we are, trapped in a cyclical amnesia where the memory of disaster fades just quickly enough to make way for the next wave of coastal development and economic exploitation. Many wonder whether humanity has become fundamentally disconnected from nature, choosing to pave over the warnings of the past rather than heed them, replacing the natural sponges of the wetlands with impermeable concrete that guarantees flooding. When the waters eventually rise, regardless of the seasonal forecast, the devastation is not just an engineering failure, but a profound failure of the human spirit to recognize its own limits, forcing us to ask if we have mistaken our technological prowess for absolute control over a world that remains entirely indifferent to our existence. When a storm eventually forms in this early June of 2026, its development will likely be a spectacle of terrifying speed and localized intensity, a stark reminder that a below normal season does not mean an absence of danger. Unlike the massive, slow-building systems that churn across the deep Atlantic in the peak months of late summer, early season storms, frequently coalesce quickly, sometimes forming just off the United States coast with little warning and requiring intense, unblinking vigilance from the National Hurricane Center, which has already begun issuing its regular tropical outlooks ahead of the June 1 start date. The atmosphere, though currently suppressed by the increased wind shear characteristic of a developing El Niño, still holds the latent, dangerous heat of warming oceans, waiting for even a momentary drop in atmospheric stability to ignite a cyclonic engine. The warning signs are embedded in the very physics of the atmosphere, reminding us that while the overall accumulated cyclone energy is expected to be below the long-term average, the specific threat of a rapidly developing close-tracking storm remains a profound vulnerability for coastal residents from the Gulf Coast to the eastern seaboard. Are the warning signs appearing again? They are, flashing in the updated 2000-2026 forecast cone, graphics that now include more detailed inland watch and warning information, acknowledging that the true danger often lies not in the wind, but in the water. A profound spiritual dissonance emerges in the face of this meteorological data, a realization that for countless observers and survivors of past storms, these escalating disasters are not random, meaningless acts of a chaotic universe. They are literally God's punishment, a sovereign and severe response to a society that has abandoned its sacred duty of stewardship in favor of endless consumption and coastal expansion. The sudden, violent storm becomes a mirror, reflecting our collective moral and environmental failings back at us with devastating watery clarity, stripping away the illusion of our safety and demanding a reckoning for our arrogance. Beneath the sweeping satellite imagery, the reassuring forecast percentages, and the sterile data of the meteorological models, the true story of any hurricane season is written in the quiet, intimate, and deeply anxious moments of human preparation and memory. Consider the story of Elias, a 78-year-old retired merchant marine living in a low-lying coastal community in the Carolinas, who listens to the below-normal predictions of NOAA and Colorado State University with a deep, ingrained skepticism born of decades of experience. As his community is lulled into a false sense of security by the promise of a quiet summer, Elias moves with a slow, deliberate grace, checking the hinges on his storm shutters, reviewing his evacuation routes, and packing a hurricane kit with the muscle memory of a man who has seen the ocean reclaim homes and rewrite maps. For Elias, the approaching season is not merely a meteorological event to be tracked on public apps and websites like hurricanes.gov. It is a spiritual threshold, a testing fire that strips away the superficialities of modern life and reveals what truly matters: faith, family, and the fragile resilience of the human spirit. His story is echoed up and down the coast, where community drills and education campaigns are actively underway, where neighbors share generators and sandbags, and where the vulnerability of the human condition is laid bare in the face of the vast, uncaring ocean. Some survivors of past storms describe those events in deeply spiritual terms, viewing their survival not as a matter of statistical chance, but as an act of divine grace, while others saw the disaster as a stark warning about responsibility, questioning why we continue to place our most vulnerable populations in the direct path of nature's fury. Regardless of belief, the questions raised by the disaster remain difficult to ignore, echoing in the minds of those who watch the horizon and wait. Have we learned anything from this resilience, or do we simply rely on the quiet fortitude of individuals like Elias to clean up the messes that a reckless society refuses to prevent? The quiet evenings on the porch, listening to the distant rhythmic crash of the waves, become a time for prayer and reflection. A moment where the artificial divisions of society wash away, leaving only neighbors bound together by the shared, humbling vulnerability of the human condition. To truly comprehend the sheer destructive power of these modern storms, and to understand why a below-normal forecast offers no absolute guarantee of safety, we must delve into the cold, unyielding, and deeply complex science of thermodynamics and fluid dynamics. A hurricane is, at its core, a massive heat engine, and the oceans are its fuel, drawing energy upward in towering columns of moisture as the warm water evaporates and condenses, spinning faster and tighter as the Coriolis effect imparts its relentless rotation. Forecasters point to the developing El Niño, noting that it typically increases wind shear in the Atlantic, tearing apart the vertical structure of developing storms and suppressing widespread formation, which is why the official forecast anticipates only 8 to 14 named storms. Yet, this mastery of meteorological data has bred a dangerous complacency, a widespread belief that understanding the macro environment makes us entirely safe from the micro events that cause the most profound devastation. Flooding remains the single biggest threat from hurricanes, even in below-average seasons, a brutal reality that does not require Category 5 winds to unleash catastrophic destruction upon fragile infrastructure and poorly planned communities. We have mapped these phenomena with astonishing precision, utilizing satellites, ocean buoys, aircraft reconnaissance, and complex computer models to predict landfall and wind speeds. Yet, this technological triumph often blinds us to the fundamental unpredictability of nature. Have we learned anything from the scientific warnings Or have we merely mistaken our technology for control, believing that because we can predict the storm's path, we can somehow mitigate its wrath? The science is clear, but our response to it remains deeply flawed, caught between the urgency of the data and the inertia of human habit. As we watch the sea surface temperatures climb and the atmospheric patterns shift, knowing that the physics of a landfalling storm remain violently, unforgivingly unchanged. The profound vulnerability of our coastal communities is not solely the result of the storms themselves, but of the catastrophic environmental changes we have engineered upon the landscape over the past century, fundamentally altering the Earth's natural defenses. For decades, we have systematically dismantled the delicate ecosystems that once protected us, draining the vast, sprawling wetlands and barrier marshes that acted as giant, porous sponges, absorbing storm surge and dissipating wave energy before it could reach our homes. We have channelized rivers, dredged inlets, and hardened shorelines with concrete seawalls, severing the delicate hydrological connections that sustain the coast and replacing them with impermeable surfaces that guarantee catastrophic flooding when the heavy rains finally fall. This disappearing wetland ecosystem, compounded by the relentless, measurable rise of global sea levels and the warming of the oceans, creates a compounding vulnerability that no seasonal forecast, no matter how accurate, can adequately address or mitigate. Are we building communities in places nature repeatedly tries to reclaim? The evidence suggests we are, driven by short-term economic incentives, the lucrative demands of the real estate market, and a profound, willful denial of our environmental reality. Climate change is no longer a distant theoretical forecast. It is the present undeniable reality, manifesting in warmer oceans that provide more moisture and energy to any storm that manages to form, regardless of the suppressing influence of El Niño. And in this context of willful environmental degradation, a sobering, inescapable truth takes root in the minds of those who observe the changing world. These disasters are literally God's punishment. They are the inevitable righteous consequence of a civilization that has chosen the endless extraction of wealth over the long-term stewardship of the earth, demanding a severe and watery reckoning for the ecosystems we have destroyed and the natural order we have so arrogantly disrupted. They are the inevitable, righteous consequence of a civilization that has chosen the endless extraction of wealth over the long-term stewardship of the earth, demanding a severe and watery reckoning for the ecosystems we have destroyed and the natural order we have so arrogantly disrupted. When we consider the intersection of faith, environmental responsibility, and the unpredictable, terrifying power of the weather, a deeper, more profound philosophical reckoning begins to take hold. Long before the first tropical depression even forms, the destruction wrought by these storms forces us to confront the absolute limits of human power and the fragile, fleeting illusion of our own permanence, stripping away the modern superficialities to reveal the raw, humbling truth of our vulnerability and our absolute dependence on the natural world. In the quiet aftermath of the floodwaters, when the immediate focus shifts from survival to recovery, a deeper truth emerges. We are not separate from nature, standing above it as masters, but are inextricably bound to it, subject to the same unforgiving laws of cause and effect that govern the physical universe. The intersection of faith and environmental stewardship becomes a central pillar of the post-disaster dialogue as communities mourn their losses and question the trajectory of a civilization that has forgotten its moral and ecological obligations. Some view the event through the lens of faith, seeing the storm as a divine call to repentance a literal punishment from God for our collective abandonment of the ancient wisdom of stewardship, while others view it through the lens of science, pointing to the undeniable metrics of a warming planet and the hubris of coastal development. Regardless of belief, the questions raised by the disaster remain difficult to ignore, echoing to the shattered pines and flooded streets. We are forced to ask ourselves if we have forgotten that the earth is not a mere commodity to be consumed and paved, but a sacred trust to be protected and revered. The storm, in its terrible, awe-inspiring majesty, strips away our illusions of control, leaving only the raw, humbling truth of our vulnerability, reminding us that human pride is no match for the forces of nature, and that the damage we inflict upon the environment is ultimately damage we inflict upon ourselves, our children, and the sacred creation we were meant to tend. Looking toward the horizon of the 2000-2006 season, the long-range forecasting models paint a picture of shifting, escalating risks that is as scientifically robust as it is deeply unsettling, particularly as we approach the peak activity months of August and September. While the early months of June and July may be suppressed by the atmospheric stability and wind shear of a developing El Niño, climatologists and meteorologists warn that the ocean heat content will reach its maximum in late summer, providing ample fuel for rapid intensification, a phenomenon that continues to be the subject of intense, urgent research. The compound risks of rising sea levels, subsiding coastlines, and increasingly volatile atmospheric steering patterns mean that the baseline of what we consider a normal season is shifting beneath our feet, rendering the century-old flood maps obsolete and the historical precedents unreliable. The infrastructure that was designed for the climate and sea levels of the 20th century is fundamentally, dangerously inadequate for the realities of the 21st century. A fact that the insurance and reinsurance markets watch closely, adjusting risk pricing in ways that will ripple through the coastal economy and alter the very fabric of these communities. What happens next? The models tell us that the true test of the season is still months away, and that the quiet days of early June are merely a temporary, deceptive reprieve. Yet, despite these clear, data-driven forecasts, the pattern of coastal development and cultural complacency continues unabated, driven by the false comfort of a below-normal prediction. Are the warning signs appearing again? They are flashing in every updated climate report, every revised forecast cone, and every flooded street from previous years. Yet we seem paralyzed by a collective inability to alter our course, choosing instead to trust the numbers rather than prepare for the physical reality of the water. What lessons are we refusing to learn as we drift deeper into the season, ignoring the shifting baseline of our own vulnerability? As the current quiet stretch of early June wanes and the skies remain clear, a false, dangerous sense of security inevitably settles over the coast, a psychological vulnerability that is every bit as perilous as the physical threat of the storm. The beaches are crowded with summer tourists, the real estate market remains robust, and the cultural narrative shifts seamlessly from hurricane preparedness to the carefree enjoyment of the season, lulled by the media coverage that ramps up significantly as June 1 approaches, but quickly fades in the absence of immediate threats. But this normalcy is a profound illusion, a fragile, transparent veneer stretched over a deeply unstable and changing reality. A reality where the ocean has not forgotten its absorbed heat, and the atmosphere retains the memory of the volatility that fueled the storms of the past. The next system is already forming in the deep tropical waters, or will soon spark off the continental shelf in a rapid burst of development, a silent, invisible accumulation of energy waiting for the precise atmospheric conditions to unleash its fury upon the coast. What happens next is entirely dependent on the choices we make in these quiet, uneventful intervals between the storms, on our willingness to embrace personal responsibility for our safety and the safety of our neighbors. Will we continue to fortify our illusions with higher seawalls, deeper denial, and a blind trust in a below-normal forecast that guarantees nothing? Or will we finally embrace the humility required to review our evacuation plans, pack our hurricane kits, and recognize the fundamental truth that it only takes one storm to cause life-altering, catastrophic damage? Regardless of the seasonal average, the future is not yet written, but the pen is in our hands and the ink is running dry. As government agencies coordinate for potential response needs and businesses in vulnerable areas review their continuity plans, waiting for the inevitable moment when the quiet ends. We must recognize that these recurring disasters are, for many, literally God's punishment, a severe, terrifying mercy designed to wake us from our slumber of arrogance before the final, irreversible tipping point is reached, demanding that we stay informed via official sources and understand that preparation, not prediction, is what ultimately saves lives. The sun finally sets over the Atlantic, casting long golden and then deep purple shadows across the dunes, the marsh grasses, and the quiet, restored streets of the coastal towns. Indifferent to the forecasts, the fears, and the fragile ambitions of the humans who dwell upon its shores, the air is cool and heavy, carrying the faint, briny, eternal scent of the ocean, a scent that has remained unchanged for millennia, a silent, majestic witness to the rise and fall of empires, the turning of the seasons, and the endless, cyclical march of the storms. In this tranquil, deeply atmospheric twilight, as the 2026 season begins its deceptive, quiet march toward the volatile peak of late summer, the documentary fades not to a neat resolution or a comforting promise of safety, but to a profound, lingering, and inescapable contemplation. We have explored the complex science of El Niño suppression and thermodynamics, the tragic history of our coastal hubris, the quiet resilience of the human spirit, and the urgent, spiritual imperative of environmental stewardship in a warming world. We have seen how the natural world responds to our neglect and our arrogance, and how the fragility of our concrete infrastructure mirrors the fragility of our moral and ecological resolve. Yet, as the screen slowly darkens and the final, mournful notes of a solitary cello resonate in the quiet of the evening, no absolute answers are provided, for the universe does not offer easy consolations, and the earth does not forgive our forgetfulness. We are left only with the heavy weight of our own choices, the undeniable reality of the warming waters, and the echoing, inescapable questions that hang in the humid night air, waiting for us to answer them before the winds begin to howl. Are we repeating history? Have we learned anything from the waters that have risen before? And, most importantly, as we look toward the darkening, uncertain horizon of tomorrow, have we truly learned the lessons of the past?